Hello, everybody. It's Uncle John from Your Story Hour, and we're back at the duck pond on the Old Homestead to read two more chapters from the book, The Mallards and Their Neighbors by Neil Wayne Northey. Um, let's get right to it. We're ready for chapters 9 and 10, and chapter 9 is entitled Trailer the Mink Takes a Hunt. Trailer the Mink was hungry, and he had been sleeping all day in his hidden den near the bank of the little river. His hidden den was not far from the home of his big cousin Lutra the otter. Trailer was different, though, from Lutra in several ways. He liked to live near Little River, but he did not like to play in the water as well as Lutra did. Also, he preferred to eat birds, while Lutra liked to eat fish. Of course, Trailer the Mink was also fond of fish, but he found it easier to catch birds. Sometimes, though, he found a fish that Lutra had killed just for the fun of fishing, and then Trailer had a feast. He always enjoyed eating someone else's catch. It was not yet dark when Trailer came out of his hidden den and looked around. Trailer was deciding where he would go.
"I believe I'll go over by the duck pond and see what I can find," he said to himself.
Trailer knew that along the duck pond there were many fuzzy cattails and tumbled bulrushes and much swampy grass. He also knew that along the marshy banks was the favorite haunt of jacksnipe, Sicklebill the curlew, and Longbill the rail. It was Trailer's favorite hunting ground. Trailer sat by his den and listened. He wondered if it was dark enough so that he would dare to start. "Curlew, curlew," said Sicklebill the curlew, over near the duck pond. He was very proud of his name and kept repeating it. "Skipe, skipe," said Jack Snipe. It was too tempting for Trailer the Mink. He left his hidden den and started through the grass and brush toward the duck pond, where he heard Sicklebill the curlew and Jack Snipe. It was not strange that Sicklebill and Jack both liked the marshy banks along the duck pond, because they were near relatives. They were also related to Killdeer the plover and Sharpnose the woodcock. One would have thought that Longbill the rail was also one of their cousins, because he was small and had a very long pointed bill. Instead, though, Longbill was a cousin of Sandhill the crane. It seemed queer that Longbill the rail, who was not more than half as large as Bobby White, could be related to Sandhill the crane, who was almost as tall as Bud Smith, but that is true nevertheless. Longbill had long toes as well as a long bill, and these enabled him to run across muddy ground without sinking. His big cousin Sandhill the crane didn't always live near swamps, but many times lived far from the water on the broad prairie. There was one thing about Sicklebill the curlew that was different from his cousin Jack Snipe. Whenever he alighted on the ground, he always held his wings up in the air for a while and then very deliberately folded them, as if he were quite particular about how it was done. When Trailer the Mink left his hidden den and started through the grass and brush, he did not go far before he smelled the track of Jimmy the swamp rabbit. Oh, it smelled fresh, so Trailer slipped noiselessly through the weeds and grass, following Jimmy's trail and thinking that he might surprise him. You see, Trailer had a very keen nose. He could not see Jimmy's tracks in the grass, but he could smell them. Trailer had soft feet, for they were padded with hair, but if Jimmy did not see him coming, Trailer knew that he would have him by the throat before he knew he was near. After a while, Jimmy's trail came to the little river, and that was as far as Trailer could follow him, because Jimmy had jumped into the water and swum right across, and had not left any scent for Trailer to follow. Trailer decided then that he was thirsty, and jumped into the little river for a drink and a bath. Before he came out, he had found a crawfish. Trailer rather liked crawfish, but one crawfish was not nearly enough to satisfy Trailer's ravenous appetite. "Curlew, curlew," called Sicklebill from the swampy bank. "Skipe, skipe," answered Jack Snipe, and away went Trailer again to see if he could find one of them for supper. Trailer's little black eyes looked sharply here and there. Every little way he stopped and sniffed to see if the playful air whiffs were bringing him the odor of supper. Then he would slip quietly through the swamp grass and waving wild rice for a while, and then stop and sniff again. Suddenly, Trailer the mink stopped and sat up. He wasn't far from the bank of the duck pond. He sniffed again to make sure that he had not been mistaken.
I smell duck, he said to himself. My, how good fat duck will taste.
Trailer slipped through the grass to the bank of the pond, and there, only a few feet away, sat Midget the teal, busily engaged in oiling his feathers. You see, Midget carried a small oil holder, like a pimple, on the top of his tail. Before he went into the water, he first rubbed his bill on the oil holder and then on his feathers. In that way, he kept them from getting wet. Trailer crept a little nearer and made ready to spring. He was lying so flat in the grass that Midget did not see him, and besides, Midget was too busy to be thinking about looking around. He was in a hurry to get his feathers oiled so that he could go for a swim. In fact, Midget was being careless. Just as Trailer was ready to spring on Midget the teal, there was a loud noise overhead. Zoom! Went Zoomer the nighthawk as he shot down through the air. Of course, Midget looked up to see what was going on, and when he did, he saw Trailer. And you may be sure that Midget did not wait to finish his feathers before getting into the water. Chapter number 10. Mrs. Mallard builds a nest.
Where are you going?
Asked Mr. Mallard one day as Mrs. Mallard left the duck pond and started walking into the dense swamp grass and fuzzy cattails along their sheltered little cove.
I'm going to look for a nesting place, said Mrs. Mallard. I heard Mrs. Spoonbill tell Shoveler yesterday that she had already found a nice place that...
And anyway, let me start that paragraph over again.
I'm going to look for a nesting place, replied Mrs. Mallard. I heard Mrs. Spoonbill tell Shoveler yesterday that she had already found a place that suited her.
And away sneaked Mrs. Mallard as quietly as possible, for she did not want any of the other little wild creatures to see her. You see, Mrs. Mallard has to be very careful about where she builds her nests. She must keep it hidden from Billy Coon and Trailer the Mink and Snoop the Weasel and Reddy Fox and many other enemies. Mrs. Mallard cannot build her nest in a tree where Reddy Fox could not get to it because her feet are not made for roosting in trees. And so, Mrs. Mallard was looking for a place on the ground where Trailer the Mink and Billy Coon and Reddy Fox were not likely to go. That was quite a problem for Mrs. Mallard because there are few places that are safe from the keen nose of Reddy Fox and Trailer the Mink. Now, if Mrs. Mallard had been like her cousin Mrs. Wood Duck, it would have been quite easy to build a nest where not even Billy Coon could get to it. That is, it would have been easy to find if a suitable hollow nesting tree could have been found. Mrs. Wood Duck finds a hollow nesting tree not far from water. If it has a small doorway, then Billy Coon cannot get in and take the fluffy ducklets when they are hatched. How do you suppose, then, that the fluffy ducklets get out of that hole and into the water before they can fly? Well, first Mrs. Wood Duck takes a fluffy ducklet in her bill and flies to the water with it. She then leaves it in a hiding place and flies back after another and another and another. Soon all of her fluffy ducklets are enjoying their first swim, and whenever Mrs. Wood Duck sounds a note of warning, all of the fluffy ducklets scamper to a hiding place. Mrs. Mallard did not know of this secret, though. She always built her nest on the ground, but Mrs. Mallard had some secrets of her own, which no doubt were just as good as Mrs. Wood Duck's. One of them was that she would cover herself with old leaves while she was sitting on her eggs. Mrs. Mallard's dress was a grayish-brown, striped with black, and when she covered herself with dead leaves and grass, with only her head sticking out, she looked just like a pile of trash. And so Mrs. Mallard was quite particular about where she built her nest. Once she found a place that suited her exactly, except the color did not quite match her own. Already the grass was getting green, and there was just too much contrast between it and her brown dress. At last Mrs. Mallard found just the place she was looking for. It was between two roots of a hollow willow tree and was entirely hidden by vines and brush. The ground was covered with leaves that had fallen the previous fall, and these would make a natural blanket for her. The doorway was between two bushes that hid the nesting place from the front, and the big trunk of the drooping willow tree itself would be a protection from the back. And the nesting place was just near enough to the sheltered little cove so that Mrs. Mallard could run down for a drink and a swim sometimes. It was not much trouble for Mrs. Mallard to build her nest after she had once found a nesting place, and especially when everything was so handy. First, she hollowed out a low place between the two roots which formed the sides of her nest. Then she carried some fine grass and fuzzy cattail tops and made a nest in the hollow place. After that, she plucked some of her own soft, warm down from her breast and lined the nest so that the fluffy ducklets would not get cold after they were hatched. Mrs. Mallard was very much pleased with her nest, and one day she took Mr. Mallard to see it. Already it held 4 eggs, and looked as if they had been stained a yellow-drab color. Of course, Mrs. Mallard kept them mostly hidden with leaves when she was away, but even if she had not, they were so near the color of the leaves that they would have been hard to see. Within a few more days, Mrs. Mallard had a nestful of eggs, and she decided that it was time to stay on her nest and keep the eggs warm so that every one would become a fluffy ducklet. That left Mr. Mallard alone most of the time when he was not hiding near Mrs. Mallard to watch for enemies. Shovel was also alone, and sometimes he and Mr. Mallard met for a visit. One day, Bud and Mary Smith went to the duck pond for a walk, and they noticed Mr. Mallard and Shoveler were alone. "I wonder if Mrs. Mallard and Mrs. Spoonbill are on their nests, or if something has caught them," said Mary. "My guess would be that they're staying on their nests," said Bud. "It isn't likely that something would catch both of them. That would be quite unusual." "Oh, I can hardly wait to see the fluffy ducklets," said Mary. "I wonder how many the Mallards will have." After that, Mary and Bud each made frequent trips to the duck pond when the other wasn't watching. Each of them wanted to be the first to see the fluffy ducklets and tell the other all about it, but Mrs. Mallard was so interested and busy with her own affairs that she knew nothing about Mary and Bud's interest in her fluffy ducklets. She was expecting her yellow eggs to hatch almost any time, and she wanted to be near to care for the fluffy ducklets when they broke open the shells and came out. She knew that if she did not keep them covered, an enemy might see them. That's the end of chapter 10. Come back tomorrow, and Aunt Nikki will have 2 more chapters from the Mallards and their neighbors. Can't wait to see you then. Bye-bye.